Hello everyone. Today we will be wrapping up the third section of Chapter 16 in the treatment of psychological disorders. And so the last form of psychotherapy that the chapter talks about is group therapy. And so examples of group therapy include Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and so group therapy has been found to be effective for some people. And so in some cases, though, it can do more harm than good. And so one example of this, or several examples of this, is if certain members encourage counter-therapeutic behaviors like using alcohol or avoiding people with moderate problems, may be exposed to people with more severe problems, which may make them oversensitive to symptoms they otherwise may not found disturbing. So furthermore, group therapy is typically not led by trained therapists, and information may not be kept confidential outside of the group. Advantages include having a group of individuals who understand and have experienced what you may have been going through, and is often free to group members. And so with this, it's natural to think that psychopathology is an illness that affects only one individual, but oftentimes our interactions with other people can be a large part of why we have certain problems. So when a couple is having problems, neither individual may be suffering from any kind of psychopathology. It may be that the behavior of the couple itself is dysfunctional. And so couples therapy is when a married, cohabitating, or dating couple is seen together in therapy to work on problems that usually arise within the relationship. So treatment strategies would target changes in both parties, focusing on ways to break their repetitive dysfunctional patterns and or focusing on their communications or faulty beliefs. So there are other cases when even larger groups may be warranted. For example, if an adolescent is abusing alcohol, but the source of the problem is really the adolescent's relationship with the mother or other family members in particular, this may be useful for the whole family to be involved in a type of family therapy. So the therapist works to understand how the family members relate to one another, how the family is organized, and how it changes over time. So in fact, family therapy has been found to be particularly effective for the treatment of issues in adolescence. So here we switch to discussing medical and biological treatments of psychological disorders. So the first antipsychotic medication was actually developed as a sedative and was known as Thorazine. So doctors found that when they administered it to people with or individuals with schizophrenia, that these patients became euphoric and docile. So antipsychotic drugs are used to treat schizophrenia and other related psychotic disorders. So these medications completely changed the way patients with schizophrenia were treated. And so before the introduction of these drugs, patients were often so disruptive and difficult to manage that the only way to protect them and others was to keep them in asylums. And after the introduction of antipsychotic medication, the number of people in these asylums or psychiatric hospitals decreased by more than 2/3. So antipsychotic drugs made it possible to deinstitutionalize hundreds of thousands of people and gave it a major boost in the field of psychopharmacology. And so antipsychotic drugs are believed to block dopamine receptors in the parts of the brain, such as the mesolimbic area around the midbrain, which reduces dopamine activity in these areas. And they work well for positive symptoms such as hallucinations, as well as negative symptoms involving emotional numbing and social withdrawal. So the most commonly used anti-anxiety medications are benzodiazepines, and this is a type of tranquilizer that works by facilitating the action of GABA. And GABA has a natural calming effect on the brain, and it's commonly prescribed benzodiazepines include Valium and Xanax. And they usually take effect in a matter of minutes and are effective in reducing symptoms of anxiety. Doctors are relatively cautious in prescribing these because they have potential for abuse. and they are often associated with the development of tolerance, where the individual needs higher dosages over time to receive the same effect. And because people become tolerant of this medication, they also risk experiencing symptoms of withdrawal. And this includes increased heart rate, shaking, insomnia, agitation, and anxiety. All the symptoms the drug was actually supposed to eliminate in the first place. So for this reason, people who have been on benzodiazepines for long periods of time often have to discontinue these medications gradually over time in order to minimize withdrawal symptoms. And the most common side effect of these benzodiazepines is drowsiness, although they can have negative effects on coordination and memory. When it's combined with alcohol, they depress respiration rate, which can lead to accidental death. And so here we talk about antidepressants and mood stabilizers. And antidepressants are a class of drugs that help lift people's moods. And so they were first introduced in the 1950s when a drug originally used to treat tuberculosis was found to elevate an individual's mood. And so this medication is known as an MAOI. And this type of medication prevents the enzyme from breaking down norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. And as you can remember, depression is associated with lower levels of these neurotransmitters. So despite their effectiveness, however, MAOIs are rarely prescribed anymore because of their serious side effects. So this includes dizziness and loss of sexual interest. And these are often difficult to tolerate for individuals and because they interact with many over-the-counter drugs. So a second class of antidepressants is called tricyclic antidepressants, and these were also introduced in the 1950s. These medications block the reuptake of norepinephrine and serotonin, increasing the amount of these in the synapse. And so side effects include dry mouth, constipation, difficulty urinating, blurred vision, and racing heart. And because of these side effects, they are used much less frequently than in the past. Among the most commonly used antidepressants today are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, and these include drugs such as Prozac, Celexa, and Paxil. Almost all of them effectively treat not only depression, but anxiety disorders as well. And so they also resolve problems with things such as eating disorders. These are not recommended for treating disorders such as bipolar disorder because they may actually trigger a manic episode. So we see that they can help treat some related psychological disorders like anxiety and eating disorders, but not bipolar disorder. So medication can be an effective biological treatment, but for some people, medications don't work or the side effects are intolerable. So if this group of people do not respond to therapy either, what else can they do? The alternative options tend to be risky and poorly understood. One example is electroconvulsive therapy, and more commonly known as shock therapy. This is a treatment that involves inducing a mild seizure in the person by delivering an electrical shock to the brain. And so the shock is applied to the person's scalp for less than a second and is primarily used to treat severe depression, though it may be useful in the treatment of mania as well. The main side effect of ECT or electroconvulsive therapy is impaired short-term memory. And so this usually improves over the first month or two after the end of therapy. Next is transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. And this is an alternative because it is non-invasive and it has fewer side effects than ECT. And with this, the side effects include a mild headache and risk for seizure, but it has no impact on memory or concentration. And then thirdly, phototherapy may be helpful to help individuals who have a seasonal pattern of depression, such as SAD or seasonal affective disorder. So typically the patient is exposed to bright light in the mornings using a lamp designed for this purpose. So treatment typically lasts 2 hours each day for a week, which seems to be effective, at least in the short term. So psychosurgery is another biological treatment. It was controversial even when it began in the 1930s with the invention of the lobotomy. So this is where doctors sever connections between the frontal lobe and inner brain structures known to be involved in emotion, and this is often in the thalamus. So though it is extremely successful in reducing anxiety, side effects such as lethargy and childlike impulsivity are permanent. And the increased precision with which we can conduct surgery today, however, has led to variations of lobotomies that are less devastating to the individual. So long-term follow-ups demonstrate that these are effective for people who don't respond to medication or therapy. However, they only are reserved for the most severe cases. One non-destructive form of psychosurgery is deep brain stimulation. And this is where a small battery-powered device is implanted in the brain. And this has been effective in treating obsessive-compulsive disorder, tremors that accompany Parkinson's disease, and severe cases of depression. Either way, these methods are a last resort. So now we'll switch gears to talking about treatment effectiveness. And so when you get sick and go to the doctor, the treatment often involves taking a pill. So you take the pill and you get better. Would you ever consider that you got better simply because you took the pill? Most of us would often make this assumption, but there are 3 main ways that this relationship could actually be confounded. So maybe you would have gotten better anyway by natural improvement. Maybe the pill wasn't the thing that actually cured you, so this would be a non-specific treatment effect. Or maybe after you get better, you remember having been more ill than you really were. And so similarly, when discussing treatment effectiveness, we have to take into consideration alternatives to our treatment being effective. So natural improvement is the tendency of symptoms to return to their mean or average level. So you think the pill cured you, but you actually had a bug in your body that was on the verge of getting rid of anyway. Non-specific treatment effects refers to the illusion in which a client or a therapist attributes the client's improvement to a feature of the treatment that wasn't actually the active element of helping the client to improve. And so perhaps your doctor was just a really pleasant, hopeful individual who led you to believe that things would improve. So your warm relationship with your doctor, rather than the medication that he gave you, is what really helped you feel better. So simply believing that you're getting a treatment can also be a non-specific treatment effect, and we actually find this in research. So these instances explain the positive outcomes that some people experience by being placed on a placebo treatment. And so what makes the placebo effect is that the patient's belief that this treatment will work. So research has found that a large percentage of people or individuals with anxiety, depression, and other emotional problems experience significant improvement only after taking a placebo or sugar pill. So just simply believing that the treatment will work was enough for that individual to feel better and to not experience the degree of symptoms, of depressive symptoms or anxious symptoms that they once were. So taking this into consideration, we'll look at how we actually study treatment's effectiveness at treating individual symptoms. So it's important when choosing a treatment to evaluate how well and how efficiently that treatment works. So there are 2 main ways to study a treatment's effectiveness, and these involve outcome studies, which assess whether one treatment intervention decreases significantly more depressive symptoms rather than another intervention or waitlist control group who does not receive treatment. The second type of study involves process studies, where they also examine which intervention works for which type of client and under which condition. And because both types of studies are also plagued by treatment illusions, quality research designs will implement a double-blind research procedure when possible. And so double-blind experiments include both the client and the therapist not knowing which group the client is a part of, which actually cuts down on treatment illusions and also experimenter biases. And so distinguished psychologist Hans Eysenck reviewed the relatively few studies of psychotherapy effectiveness that was available in 1957 and caused a riot among therapists by claiming that therapy, particularly psychoanalysis, was ineffective. And it was good for the field of psychology because this implemented a widespread call for psychotherapy outcome studies that have given us a much more optimistic view of our techniques. And so the typical client that is seen in treatment has better outcomes than 75% of those individuals that are not being treated. So though there are obviously weaknesses in how patients are tested, diagnosed, and treated, there is strong evidence supporting the efficacy of many of our treatments. And so in order to distinguish between treatments that are clearly effective in treating symptoms versus those that still need further scientific investigation, APA, or the American Psychological Association, has set several guidelines. And so the two distinctions include well-established treatments, which are treatments that have been found to be effective in a large number of studies, and probably efficacious treatments, which have preliminary empirical support, but still need further scientific investigation to make them move up a tier into well-established treatments. And so here we end with a list of well-established treatments that have been identified as efficacious in the treatment of these specific diagnoses. And as we can see, cognitive and behavior therapies have been found to be effective for a great number of different diagnoses on the list. And so with that wraps up Chapter 16 in the treatment of psychological disorders.